Hey y'all, who dat, and welcome in. My name is Jeff Nowak, and this is another episode of Inside Black and Gold. I'm coming at you solo, mainly because I went through a project over these last few days. I went through every single UDFA, and I figured I'd give you a segment which is effectively Meet the UDFAs. And I say segment, I really do mean multiple episodes. So we're going to have 3 segments today on the offense. And then in the next episode, we're going to have 3 segments on the defense. And there's a punter thrown in there. I got 8 and 8. So the punter ends up on the side with the defense. But I thought this would be a great way to kind of introduce everyone to this 16-person UDFA class prior to the start of rookie minicamp, which is May 10th through 12th, when we'll get a chance to talk to some of these guys in person. Now, we have gotten a chance to talk to every single one of them on Zoom calls, and that's where a lot of this project came in, because I went through every single one of those interviews. I pulled out some details, some notes on every player. I wanted to get eyes on every single one to at least some extent. Some of these guys are from smaller schools. Some of these guys are from Southeast Missouri, right? So you're not going to have a ton of readily accessible tape, particularly for guys that weren't at the combine, that weren't high-end draft options. So it took some time, but I feel like I have a pretty good rundown of all of these players. I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of where they're going to factor in, what guys have a more legitimate chance to make the roster, what guys are really fighting for a spot on the practice squad. So we're going to go through each one. I'm not going to throw bonus totals at you. You know, I've had people say, well, this guy got this bonus, so that means he has a better chance to make the roster. And so I will address that out front. A guy like Dallin Holker, who we'll talk about in the 3rd segment today, yes, he got a big roster bonus. Now, that's not an indicator that the Saints are looking at him as, oh man, this guy's going to make the roster. It's an indicator that there was some competition in that signing. It's also an indicator that this player probably has a good agent, because that's an opportunity for your agent to make you some extra money. It does indicate that this is a team that has incentive to go out and get this guy again. But all that means is he's getting money. Doesn't mean you're making the roster. If you go back and you look at the UDFAs who have actually made the Saints roster, there's really no correlation between signing bonus and making the roster, right? 2 years ago, they gave Abram Smith a huge number for a UDFA at least. And he didn't even make the practice squad. Now, a guy like Rashid Shaheed, they also gave a big total. He didn't make the roster, but he did make the practice squad. And then obviously later in the year came up, made an impact. Now he's a big part of this offense. So I think what you take away from the signing bonus information is not, well, this guy's going to make the roster because they gave him all this money. That money is really, it's not significant in the grand scheme of things for the Saints. But I do think it probably is, hey, this is a guy who we expect to put on the practice squad, and that's why you had the motivation to bring him in. So again, that's really not going to be part of the discussion today, but I advise people not to try to draw a direct line between signing bonus and making the roster. A guy like Lewis Kidd, you think he got a massive signing bonus? No, but he did make the roster. He's nowhere to be found today. So I do want to emphasize that, and also emphasize it is very difficult for UDFAs to make a roster, regardless of who you are, regardless of how much money they gave you coming in, regardless of whether you're from a big school or a small school. So much of the time it's about fit, and it is about special teams. And that's why in the theme of this offensive side, you know, it's very difficult for a depth wide receiver to make a roster if he cannot make a tackle on special teams. That's going to come into play in the 2nd segment when we talk about the 3 wide receivers they brought in. Right? That's why it tends to be a safety, an extra defensive back, maybe an extra linebacker who ends up being your special teams aces. Dwayne Washington is a rare example of a running back who was a special teams ace. But I digress. We're going to dive right in. And we're going to start in this Meet the UDFA segment on the offensive line, because there are 3 really intriguing offensive linemen who the Saints could opt to keep around. And the first one is right close to home, and that is Sincere Haynesworth. Now, one thing that is a trend between all 3 of these offensive linemen is they are all kind of guard center prospects. Every single one of them can play center or has played center at the college level, and you would profile as, okay, could probably play either of the guard spots. So Sincere is an interesting guy, 6'1", 310 pounds. He was one of the players who, when you look at Tulane, you look at kind of the resurgence, kind of the rebirth of Tulane over the last several years as a, wouldn't say a national power, but definitely a power in the American Athletic Conference. He's one of those guys. He, Michael Pratt, Jaquan Jackson, really kind of took ownership of that program and turned it into something that, is getting national attention. And he gets a lot of credit for that. And I think it is a lot to say about his character. Now, if you're wondering, Sincere, where did Sincere come from? It's actually a pretty simple explanation in terms of where that name came from. And I'll just let him explain it to you.
So Sincere, it's the lifestyle my mom wanted me to live. She wanted me to be a sincere person in every facet of life, whether it's in anything I do, really, just to be a sincere person. And just the best way to remind me of that and to make sure that happened was to name Be Sincere. And, it's been that as far as I've, tried. And I hope that, that's that's what I give off. And that's, what other people perceive of me as well. But it's a lifestyle my mom wanted me to live. And I'm grateful that she named me that because I love the name Sincere. It's become a big part of who I am.
If you're looking for a sincere guy, I do think that Sincere is a very apt name because he really does come off as sincere. And I think that he's going to have an uphill climb to make this roster because I think there are two players that are going to come next in this list that have a bit more upside as a prospect, but they will not have more experience. Over the last 2 years, Sincere has played in 26 games. That's 1,688 snaps. His arms are on the shorter side. That's why he's a guard prospect. I wouldn't call him the most athletic guy. He's got a 5'2", 140. But at the same time, when you're talking about offensive line prospects, I think the 40 time kind of gets overemphasized because these aren't guys that are going to be running a full long sprint downfield. You want to look at how does this guy carry his weight? How does he look on his feet? Can he move? Can he get lateral? Can he get to the second level of the offense so that he can make some of those blocks downfield? And I do think he can do that. He had a 4.59 in the shuttle, which I think is probably the more important drill in terms of gauging offensive line athleticism. Not a particularly physical guy. You don't watch him play and say, okay, this is a guy who's gonna maul people downfield. But again, you're talking about a center. You're talking about a guard. So there's a little bit more to it than that. That said, it's tough. It's tough. He will have the local sentiment on his side. But I do kind of feel like, again, he's got an uphill climb to make this roster. Moving forward. Now, this is a really interesting one, and it's Nouridin Nouili. I think I'm saying that name right. He's a guard center prospect out of Nebraska. Now, he's got a really interesting story. And one of the things he'll say about himself in terms of a positive is that he's a blank slate. He does not have any bad habits because he hasn't been playing football long enough to have bad habits. He's from Germany. He ended up in the United States as an exchange student program. He played soccer back in Germany. He got to the United States and he kind of discovered football as a passion. And he ended up having to have a conversation with his parents like, hey, I'm not coming back. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna play football because I think this is something that can lead me somewhere. And he ended up at Colorado State. He kind of took the opposite path of a guy like Dallin Holker, who started at BYU and ended up at Colorado State. He started at Colorado State, played in 7 games as a true freshman, which is rare, particularly for offensive linemen. Ultimately, he ended up walking on at Nebraska in 2020 for obvious reasons. 2020 was a rough season to walk on anywhere. He didn't really play, but he was able to be around the program and became part of the rotation in 2021. He had an issue in 2022. He failed a drug test. That impacted his year, but he really became a mainstay, particularly this last season. Started 11 games, played 10 at right guard, 1 at left guard. He's cross-trained at center. He can play center. And, I think he's just from a physicality perspective, right? He's 6'4", 315 pounds. He's got the size. Arm length isn't massive. That's why you're a guard prospect, right? But he does have good athleticism, 5.18 in the 40. And when you listen to him talk, you can kind of understand why he says his personality is a big element for him and why he's able to ingratiate himself in the locker rooms. Moving forward, the final offensive line prospect before we go to the break. And it is probably the one who has the best chance of latching on with this roster when all is said and done. It's Kyle Hergel. He's a guard / center out of Boston College, 6'2", 310 pounds. And I would comp him to James Hurst. Now, one of the reasons I would comp him to James Hurst, outside of just physical play on the field, is just his approach, his belief system, how he thinks the game, not necessarily even how he plays the game, how he thinks the game. Even when you just listen to him talk, you can kind of get that. And this is him kind of going through his journey to the NFL, how he got here.
I grew up, born and raised in Toronto, Canada. I was actually committed to New Mexico Military Institute out of high school. So I played in a prep school called Football North. You know, they produce some really good NCAA players, but you go play Friday Night Lights in America. So you get on the bus Thursday night, you know, we play Friday night, and then you get home Saturday morning. So, I was committed to New Mexico Military. I ended up not going there. I got a late offer from North Dakota. It was a 65% scholarship. I got to North Dakota. I didn't even have a locker. I had a hook and a metal chair on the side of someone else's locker. I redshirted my first year. The next year I was the newcomer of the year in the conference. And then I moved, you know, COVID happens the spring season. We only had 5 or 6 games. Then I transferred to Texas State. I play for Coach Turner and Coach Spavital. I really gelled with them in the portal. I think that it was an awesome move for me. I wanted to, challenge myself, because the whole time I knew that no one believed that I could play in the NFL, and that's something I really, really wanted to do. And I always knew that I had it in me to do that. And what was the next step? It was transferring up, playing better competition. I spent 2 years there. I was an all-conference players both years, started every game. And then I challenged myself one more time. I get to move up to the Power 5 rankings, play ACC competition. Boston College was my next stop. And, I did what I had to do. And, at every level, I've exceeded expectations. I think it's just something that I'm going to continue to do. And, I'm looking forward to it, doing with the Saints.
And here's Kyle talking about kind of what are your strengths as a player. I think you'll understand what I mean.
Yeah, some of my strengths would be preparedness. I prepare the right way. I'm the ultimate team player. I love my teammates. I enjoy, going to work every day with them. I enjoy, preparing with the coaching staff, being able to, do what's best for the team. And where do I see myself fit? Anywhere the coaches kind of need me to play. I'm a guy that's always been team first. I prepare the right way. I'm focused. I got a great work ethic. I love, working with my teammates every day, and wherever the team needs me, I'll play.
And that's a good philosophy to have, because he started 44 games at right guard. Then he ended up at left guard for this past season, started 10 games at left guard. So being able to play both sides there, and he's also cross-trained on center. Again, that's a theme. This is a team that you look at, okay, you feel like we drafted the starting right tackle of the future. This is a team that's going to look at Trevor Penning and say, hopefully we already have the starting left tackle. If that doesn't work out, then you're going to have to find something else. But at the end of the day, you at least have an option there. Right guard, Cesar Ruiz. Center, Eric McCoy. Left guard, who the hell knows? Right? And that's why these 3 players, I think there's a great shot that one of them makes the roster. And my money would be on Kyle. And, there's a lot of reasons to like Kyle. It's the guy who has his master's in sports administration. He's from Toronto. He was the number 3 pick in the CFL draft by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, Kyle says, hey, I'm 100% committed to the Saints and his opportunity as a UDFA, as well as he should be. The question's going to come, hey, if you don't make the roster and you're trying to sign to the practice squad, would you be better off going up to the CFL and playing there? Now, you could go either way on that, and I would understand. But for now, you're talking about a guy who's definitely going to be here. When he was drafted, I had someone say, well, there's a roster spot. I don't think you give up on a chance to compete for a roster spot to go play in the CFL. Now, I could see him, again, saying, practice squad, we'll talk. Let me go play professionally somewhere else for a little while. But again, you're talking about a guy who studies the game. He's very intelligent. You can tell by listening to him talk. He's just a guy who thinks through the game. I don't think he's as polished from a technique perspective as he probably needs to be. He's very athletic, and he's a very good prospect for what the Saints need. He's familiar with the wide zone systems. His offensive line coach, Matt Applebaum, I think I'm saying that correctly, he was Mike McDaniel's offensive line coach in 2022 with the Dolphins. So he leaves the Dolphins and goes up to Boston College and kind of installs these blocking schemes for his offensive line. And they kind of mirror, not exactly, but they very similarly mirror what Mike McDaniel was doing down in Miami. And that's obviously an offshoot of the Kyle Shanahan scheme. So you can see these lines starting to intersect and understand, okay, this is a guy who probably has an idea of what he needs to do. He also wears that same kind of spaceman helmet that Ryan Ramczyk wore, that kind of gigantic looking thing. You can see it in the picture if you're watching on YouTube. But he's strong, 30 reps on the bench press, 0 sacks allowed in his final year at Boston College, 2 pressures. I would say he's a better run blocker at this point than pass blocker, but I also think he can get the job done in both areas. So the last thing I'll say is he was at the East West Shrine Bowl. Jari Evans was there working with a lot of prospects. They were on opposite teams, so they didn't work together. But Jari did get a good look at him. And so if you're wondering, okay, why did they get drawn to this guy as opposed to somebody else, that exposure to one of the Saints offensive line coaches probably didn't hurt the situation. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. Again, we went through Sincere Haynesworth, Nouridin Nouili, I think he goes by Nouri, and Kyle Hergel. Again, I think one of these 3 guys has a good shot to make the roster. If not, I expect one of them or more to land on the practice squad, because guard center is a position that, I don't think you can ever have too many options at center, right? Especially when it's a guy who would primarily be a guard prospect and you would go from there. But they'll be competing with Shane Lemieux, Nick Saldiveri, last year's 4th round pick, for that spot. And someone's got to start. I don't think it's going to be one of these 3 guys, but someone's got to win that job. So that's going to be an interesting position to watch in camp. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. We will be right back for segment 2 of the Meet the UDFAs segment. I'm Jeff Nowak. Stick around. All right, and we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. We are continuing on our Meet the UDFAs segment. But first things first, I do want to say thank you to everyone who's listening to this podcast. We're in year 3 now, which is kind of crazy. We're still growing. We're still picking up steam as we go. We're ticking up toward 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is awesome. When I started this channel 3 years ago, where I took it over 3 years ago, I think I had 400 subscribers. And we've grown steadily since then. So I just want to thank everybody. We don't ask for any money from y'all. We just appreciate all the listeners. I have people ask me, okay, how can we support the podcast? Because we don't offer subscriptions, or at least paid subscriptions, that sort of thing. And what I will tell people, and what I'm going to say right now, if you know Saints fans, relatives, friends who listen to podcasts, or you think should listen to podcasts because you want them to be more informed in their sports takes, suggest us. That's all. Just say, hey, I listen to this podcast. I like it. You should listen to it too. And I mean this genuinely. That is the most helpful thing anyone can ever do for us from a podcast perspective, because the best way to grow a podcast is to just have people who listen to it and like it tell their friends, expand that circle. And so, if you're able to do that, I really do appreciate it. Otherwise, if you haven't subscribed yet, you should do that too. Maybe give us a rating, give us a review, tell us what you think. But again, this podcast is fun to put together. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate all the people that reach out to me. I even appreciate the ones who tell me I'm stupid, because at least you're listening. But all right, let's continue on this Meet the UDFA segment. In this second segment, we're going to go through kind of the more fun options, and it's the wide receivers. So wide receivers. And the first one is really kind of an intriguing guy that I don't think a lot of people know much about. And that's because you didn't watch him play, right? And that's Kyle Sheets, wide receiver out of Slippery Rock. If you don't know where Slippery Rock is, I think it's north of Pittsburgh. You got a couple Pittsburgh area UDFAs, and it's not the University of Pittsburgh, although the Saints did get Bub Means out of Pittsburgh. So when you look at all the rookies, there's several, the Saints really mined the Pittsburgh area. They left no stone unturned, no pun intended. And that includes the Slippery Rock guy, D2. Kyle Sheets, 6'4", 220. When we talked to him last week, I asked him if anyone had approached him about potentially converting to tight end. Because anytime you have a 6'4", 220-something pound wide receiver, it's a natural question, right? The tight end we're about to talk about is 6'4", 235, right? So really all it requires is, hey, eat some extra pancakes, put on a couple pounds, and make sure you're ready to block when those defensive ends are coming through. He said no, not really. He got a little of that early in the process, but primarily it's just looking at him as an outside threat, a guy who can come in, even if you're not technically a tight end, a bigger bodied wide receiver can still come in and block, particularly in the slot. And he said that's kind of what he expects at the NFL level. But, he's intriguing. And there's not a ton of tape to watch on Kyle, but you look at his numbers and it's remarkable. This man, this season alone, this past season, 76 catches, 1,186 yards, 17 touchdowns. This past season alone, he had 29 touchdown catches in 3 seasons. This past year, he had a 4-game stretch where he went 28 catches, 549 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 4 games. Now, yes, he's going up against D2 cornerbacks, and he's feasting on D2 cornerbacks. So we don't need to get too crazy about these crazy numbers. But at the same time, I don't care who you're playing. 17 touchdowns in a season is impressive. And it's impressive when you see how he did it, too, because he's not a burner. You're talking about a guy with a 4.5, 240. I would say he's got long speed, right? When you watch him on tape, he's not a guy who's gonna blow by you off the line, but he is a guy who has long strides and seems to really get into it downfield. And then he has kind of a basketball ability to go up and high point a ball. And, at the NFL level, if you can do that, you can make some money. I don't think he's going to make the roster. I think he has a chance to stick around on the practice squad, but we'll have to see. I do feel like his blocking is an asset. He's a sneaky good athlete, not blazing speed. He played quarterback coming up. A lot of these guys did, when you talk to players coming in as UDFAs, honestly, if you talk to any player coming into the NFL, I'd probably find like 60% of them played quarterback in high school, because in high school, you're just looking for your best athlete and saying, here, you're going to have the ball in your hands all the time. I think that's kind of what you were looking at with Kyle. And I think that's where you're going to go from there. But again, Slippery Rock. It's going to be fun to talk about. It's going to be fun to make some rock puns every time he makes a big catch. Anyway, moving on to Deontay Hardy 2.0. That's not fair. We don't need to call Jermaine Jackson Deontay Hardy 2.0, but I will say a lot of people already have done it, because this is another 5'7", like 175-pound wide receiver. He fits the mold of every year we bring in a return ace and we see what happens. It's what you did with Deontay Hardy. You brought him in out of Assumption. It's what you did with Rashid Shaheed. You brought him in out of Weber State. Last year, you brought in Malik Flowers. I want to say Montana. And he did not make the roster. So it's not exactly the example that you would put in with that. But now you have Jermaine Jackson out of Idaho. The Saints have some success going to Idaho for some prospects. Caden Ellis was a former Idaho Vandal. And, one thing that I appreciated, I asked Jermaine about his kind of return philosophy. Because to me personally, when I watch guys returning kicks, having never done it, it kind of I compare it to like running through oncoming traffic and just saying, okay, let's see what happens. But I thought his the way he described it was interesting as well. So let's listen to that. What is your kind of philosophy, and what makes a good returner? Like, what mindset do you have to have when you're back there to be successful at that?
Yeah, from a kickoff return perspective, I always seen kickoff returners like running through fire, man. You just gotta, once you get through the fire, you good. But you gotta I just always thought about like just running through fire, hit the hole fast as you can. Really not gonna be a lot of holes in this next level, but you find a crease and hit it as fast as you can. And punt return, I always my main thing was focus on the ball, catch the ball, square it up, and make the first guy miss and see what happens next.
Yeah, I asked Rashid Shaheed a similar question to that, and he gave me a similar answer. He didn't use the fire metaphor, but I think the fire thing actually works because that's really what it is. Traffic is not the best example, but if you've ever pictured, like, you go watch Spider-Man, the scene where he's going through the burning building. That's really what it is. You're looking for that kind of crease, and then you're just hitting it. Because the faster you get through, the less likely you get burned. And I do think that's a good way to kind of envision what returning a kick is like. But that's what he is. He's a return ace. He's a guy. He played 13 games last year, 48 catches, 593 yards. He had 2 punt return touchdowns, and I think that's if you're looking for him to make the roster, it's going to be as that return ace, knowing that the new kickoff rule requires a second returner, and you need that second returner to be a guy that the the other team is actually worried about to return a kick, right? Because with both those returners out there, all the kickoff team has to do is kick it away from your return ace to the guy they're not afraid of, and then you're having him return all your kicks. So it negates your return ace. If you have 2 guys out there, it is probably more likely that the kicking team just boots it into the end zone. But hey, starting every drive at the 30 isn't the worst thing that's ever happened either. So I do think that there is some utility with Jermaine Jackson. Again, I said this previously, it's an all-name draft class for the Saints. He's a guy who down the road, maybe he can develop more into a guy that you use in the offense, similarly to how Deontay Hardy kind of became that guy. He's very good at tracking down like kind of over the shoulder deep balls. The problem is at 5'7", you're really limited in terms of the type of balls you can throw downfield. You can't really throw them jump balls. You can't really throw them balls in traffic. It has to be flew by a guy. And this is not a guy who has blazing speed. I think his 40 was in the 4.4, 4.5 range. He's more quick than fast is how I would phrase it. And I would say the same thing about Deontay. Rashid is kind of that long stride speed guy. Deontay was more of that short area quickness guy. And I think that's more of what Jermaine is. And, he also says, hey, I use my size to my advantage, and because you can disappear as a 5'7" guy. And that was one thing that always kind of bugged me with Rashid is they never found ways to get him the ball in the middle of the field and use that punt return ability. They didn't really find ways to do it with Rashid last year either. Hopefully that's something with Clint, you're able to, with the new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, you're able to really get more out of that. But I'm going to say now, I've had people say, hey, Jermaine, don't sleep on Jermaine. I do think he's going to have a really hard time making this roster. For one thing, you do have a return ace already, and you only have 53 roster spots. So it's going to be hard to sell people on making that taking up a roster spot on a guy who can't go make a tackle on special teams, isn't really going to be part of your regular offense, and is really just there to be a return ace next to your return ace that you want to get the ball anyway. So that's going to be difficult. Secondly, Kool-Aid McKinstry is also kind of an elite return guy, assuming he's healthy, and you're going to be looking for ways to get Kool-Aid on the field. So how are you going to do that? You're going to want to really have him dive in on special teams, particularly if everybody's healthy. So I think that Jermaine's route to this roster is sticking on the practice squad, and maybe injuries happen. Look at what happened to Rashid Shaheed, right? Deontay Hardy got hurt. He got his chance, and he never gave that spot back. So I think there's a chance that happens, but I do think that the practice squad is the most likely spot for Jermaine. All right, moving forward, one more wide receiver, and it's a guy from my old stomping grounds up in New Haven, Connecticut, Mr. Mason Tipton, wide receiver out of Yale. I went to college in New Haven, but I did not go to Yale. I a lot of times I'll tell people, hey, I went to college in New Haven, just to see if maybe they assume I went to Yale. Because if they do, then that means they have a higher opinion of me than they should. And if they don't, then that means they know me. But Mason Tipton, an intriguing guy. You don't get a lot of Ivy League tape to go over. But from what you can watch, he's a vertical threat, right? 5'11", 187 pounds. So he ran a 4.340. He's got kind of that blazing sprinter speed. I'm just not sure he plays with it all the time. And what I mean by that is, you watch him on tape and he's making a ton of catches, right? This guy had 52 catches, 786 yards, and 10 touchdowns last year. He's very good at high pointing the ball. He's from Akron. Maybe he learned that from LeBron. He's a big LeBron fan. he also played baseball, right? And I think that makes more sense in terms of he's using those center fielder abilities. He played center field to go track down a ball. He's really good at tracking the ball in the air, which is a skill that I think is easy to overlook. I think we all just assume that NFL wide receivers can go downfield and track a ball over the shoulder, but it's a lot harder than you'd think, and it's a lot harder to do without losing speed. I talked to Derek Carr about this last year, and it's one of the things that Rashid Shaheed does really, really well, and that's what makes him kind of an elite deep threat as opposed to just a fast guy who can get wide open downfield, is he is able to not only track the ball, but track the ball at top speed. He does not lose his stride as he's getting on the line he needs to, the red line they call it. And you saw that if you go back and you watch that Colts game, it's a good example of that happening on that kind of dagger deep shot late in the game. And it's the type of thing that I think with Mason, you don't always see that. Like, you'll see him get downfield, but he's slowing up, right? He's measuring his stride a little bit more than you probably want, because you want him to be able to just blow by guys. And we're talking about Ivy League DBs, and he's kind of getting stuck on coverage a little bit. But again, he's able to go up and high point a ball. I just don't know if you're going to be able to do that as effectively at the NFL level. And so that would be my criticism of Mason. When you look at a guy's like, oh, he's got 4.3 speed, I don't see it on tape. And maybe that's something that he starts working with NFL wide receiver coaches and NFL offense, you can get a little bit more out of. But it's something that you want to see. He also doesn't move as smoothly as some of the other guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. One of their defining characteristics, along with the speed, is they're just so fluid. Like, they're in and out of breaks. Their hips are so loose, and you can just see them change direction in ways that other people can't. And I think that's another thing that Mason struggles with. But we will see. I do like Mason a lot. His first team all Ivy League. He's got really high character, right? He's a guy that you want to keep around. And we'll see. But, I think these three wide receivers are probably competing for 1 or 2 practice squad spots. And it's going to be about performance in camp that really kind of makes the difference between, hey, he's a guy who's heading over to the UFL or CFL, and someone who's sticking around in the practice squad and has a chance. And it's telling that your 4.3 guy is not your return ace. Like that makes sense, right? So we'll see. I think all three of these guys are intriguing. Bub Means is also a guy that I'm really, we haven't talked a ton about, but he's also going to factor in here. A 5th round pick is not a guaranteed roster spot. It's very likely you make the roster. But if one of these guys comes in and balls out, it's not crazy to think that they beat him out. Now, it doesn't look good when you start cutting your 5th round picks. It really is an indictment on the draft process for you. So teams are very hesitant to do it. Usually you're talking 6th, 7th rounders. You can get away with it. Saw that with Jordan Jackson a couple years ago, the defensive tackle out of Air Force. But all three of these guys, they're going to be battling with Bub to kind of show like, hey, I should have been drafted. I'm the rookie that you should have brought in the 5th round or the 6th round or the 7th round. Right. And we'll see. But I again, it's tough. It's going to be a tough nut to crack at wide receiver. And again, one of the reasons depth wide receivers are so difficult to keep on the roster, look at Emmanuel Butler, is how much can you expect out of them on special teams? If you're not the return guy, can you go down and make a tackle? Okay, but are you a better tackler than the safety who's really kind of doing the same thing? Probably not. How about the defensive back? Probably not. How about the linebacker? Probably not. And it's going to be true at running back as well in terms of, okay, if I have to pick a special teams ace and I'm between a running back and a linebacker, who am I picking? And that goes even doubly at wide receiver, because you're typically talking like lankier guys who aren't as physically dominant. Running backs are usually big, stocky guys. So you can see him. Tony Jones was an impactful special teams performer. Dwayne Washington was an impactful special teams performer. You don't see that as much as wide receivers. So that does kind of stack the deck against these UDFAs. But we'll see. Again, what I will caution people against, and this is exactly what happened with Emmanuel Butler, is you spend a lot of time watching guys who make big plays. And that's great. You want guys to make big plays, but making those plays at wide receiver isn't always going to get you the job. Now, year 2, it's a different story, right? Like Kirk Merritt, who's kind of a weird example because he didn't stick around in year 2, but Kirk Merritt was a practice squad guy year one, and then he did make the roster out of camp in year two. So a lot of times those second year UDFAs can make an impact. But we're talking about the first year UDFAs right here. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. We're going to be coming back with one more segment. We're going to talk about two more UDFAs. And yes, I've held the one you're all thinking about for last because I needed to keep you hanging around on the hook. So hopefully you are. But all right, we're going to be coming right back with the final segment of this first Meet the UDFAs episode. We're going to be talking about a running back and a tight end with a really good nickname. All right, stick around, y'all. And we're back. One more segment of Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. Follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. Subscribe, please. And we'll keep giving you content weekly, bi-weekly, whatever the term is. We're getting ready for rookie minicamp. We don't have the dates as of yet for availability, but typically it's going to be the third day, the final day, and we'll be out at practice. We will, go in the locker room. We'll get a chance to talk to a lot of these guys in person for the first time. It's a really useful event in terms of from a media perspective because it's just only the rookies. It can get a little crazy when the entire roster is there, particularly a 90-man roster. And throughout training camp, you're really only getting podium press conferences. You're not able to, we used to be able to just grab guys coming off the field and talk to them. Since COVID, that kind of got phased out, which is disappointing because it was a good way to get guys that don't typically talk as much. And instead, we kind of just have to go by the order they give us. So that's why you see a lot of press conferences in training camp. But the rookie mini camp, you really just get a chance to kind of kick it with these guys and kind of learn a little bit more about them. So I'm looking forward to that. That's a 3-day camp. It's going to run May 10th through 12th. Then we get 3 sets of OTA. It kind of works the same way in terms of we're out there for one of the days. We get to talk to them and do all that stuff for whoever is there. But we got 2 more players to talk about in this Meet the UDFA segment. I know I held up 3 fingers, but that's just because I was not paying attention to where my digits were. But the first one, I'm going to save the one you want to hear about for last because I am that way. The first one is going to be a guy that I think is getting slept on a little bit. And it's Jacob Kibodi, running back, UL Lafayette. He started his career at Texas A&M, and he started as a wide receiver. And I think that wide receiver skill set is really intriguing to me in terms of what you can do as a running back, right? The ability to run routes as a running back, it's not undervalued, right? Like it is highly valued. And it's not something that everyone comes in with. Kendre Miller, I think, can catch passes, but I would kind of liken him more to Mark Ingram in terms of a pass catcher. Like I wouldn't say that he is in the same world as Alvin Kamara as a route runner and pass catcher. Now, I think Jacob could come in and kind of show, hey, this is an elite route running skill set and go from there. But, he's also a guy that he humbled himself a little bit. He started at Texas A&M, did not work out, ended up at UL Lafayette. He's obviously a Louisiana guy. He's from Baton Rouge, grew up a Saints fan. So he's going to have a lot of local support. He's really happy to be a part of the Saints. And this is Jacob talking about kind of his maturity level that he's built over the last couple of years.
What specific things you feel that you can bring to the Saints?
Maturity in the running back room for sure. I think I'm going to be a hard worker, somebody who definitely goes in and do the right thing, somebody who loves the game. I'm a football junkie. Versatility, somebody who loves the team. Like I'm always a fan. I grew up a fan before, I even signed to the Saints. So the fact that I'm here, man, they're going to get 100% out of me.
How would you define that classification of football junkie for yourself?
It might be unhealthy, man. I live it. I breathe it. I wake up watching it. I go to sleep watching it. That is my life. You know what I mean? So, this is what I love to do.
Having an unhealthy obsession with football, it's kind of the deal, right? You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't have an unhealthy obsession with football, particularly the Saints. But no, so you have Jacob, he's got good size. He's 6'1", 218. What he said during his interview was, if he has one thing that he really has to work on that he feels like probably needs the most amount of work, it's pass protection. And that's not something you necessarily want to hear on his face, but the self-awareness to know that's an area you need to improve is important because you don't know what you don't know. And the thing is, like, the honesty of coming in and saying, yeah, I need to work on pass protection. You have a lot of guys come in and say, yeah, I need to do this, I need to do that. You're not really getting answers, but you're not getting perfect prospects as UDFA. It's like they need to understand, hey, I do need to do the work and I need to know what I need to work on. And so, hey, the self-awareness to know that that's your situation is helpful. And, when I say he has a chance to make the roster, I don't think it's because necessarily he's a far and away better prospect than a lot of these other UDFAs we've talked about today. I don't. I'm not intimating that at all. In fact, I think there are some better UDFA prospects in terms of, just talent level at their respective positions. That said, he's coming in at a position that I do think there's a spot to be taken. And, I put out the 53-man roster projection last week, and one of the gripes that people had was, well, there's no way they're only keeping 2 running backs and a fullback, not in Clint Kubiak's offense. And I agree. To me, that projection was more so kind of saying, hey, Jamal Williams' spot on this roster is not guaranteed, but I'm not going to project James Robinson to be that guy either, right? Like that's not what I'm going to say there. So to me, that's kind of saying, yeah, you want a third running back. That's a spot. If someone jumps up and grabs it, they get it, in my opinion. And that could be Jamal Williams. It could also be this guy, because if Jamal shows up and kind of looks like that kind of plotting, not non-competitive short yardage guy that he was last year, and to be fair, the offensive line did him no favors. He had a hamstring injury early in the season. Maybe that sapped a little bit of his athleticism. But at the end of the day, he wasn't good enough for what you needed him to be. He did not do what you needed him to do to justify his spot on the roster. So he's going to have to earn that back. And he's going to be in competition with Jacob Cabote, with James Robinson, with some of these other guys. So when I'm kind of handicapping who actually has a chance to make the roster, because like I said, the UDFA route to a 53-man roster spot as a rookie is a very difficult one. It's very narrow, and it's not always about the best prospect. A lot of times it is about what position situationally do you need the depth at? Because you wouldn't be here if the Saints didn't like you as a prospect, right? They like all these guys as prospects. They brought him in for a reason. They targeted him. They signed him. Some of them they had to pay a little bit more. But I think Jacob is a guy that does have some upside and could be that guy. And I will leave you with this on Jacob, because the last time the Saints brought in a Louisiana college running back, they let him get out the door, and it was Boston Scott. They actually did keep him on the initial 53-man roster, then cut him, and then he got claimed. I want to say it was the Eagles that claimed him, because he ended up on the Eagles, and I think that's where he was claimed initially. Now, Boston was not UL, it was Louisiana Tech, but I don't want to see that happen again. Every time I see Boston Scott, torching the Giants, which is if he played the Giants every week, he'd be a Hall of Famer. I get frustrated because he should be on the Saints. He made so much sense on the Saints, but they just couldn't make the numbers work. And at that point, you're talking about a team with Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, so it's not like you were desperate for the depth. But I don't know. Keep the local guy. I like the local guy. Anyway, we'll see. All right, one more UDFA on the offensive side, and it's the one everyone is very excited about. I haven't seen a guy at UDFA come in with this level of confidence in terms of everyone knows who he is. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe everyone knows who he is, and that's why you feel confident. But it's Dallin Holker, and I'm confident. I like him too, right? He's still a lot to like when you go and you look at the guy. He spent 1 year at Colorado State, and he was voted team captain. That says a lot in itself. Little undersized for a tight end, it kind of right there at the lower level of what you'd want. 6'4", 235. Probably 240. Probably want him to get up to. He's got a great nickname, the Incredible Holker. And he's a guy that we talked to, and he just seemed very, very excited to be here. And that's what you like to hear. But let's hear from Dallin a little bit from his interview the other day.
To New Orleans. I mean, obviously we saw they did not draft another tight end, which probably helped, but also maybe the fit in the offense.
Yeah, no, offense, definitely look, like a fun offense to be in. Just the coaching, getting to know the tight end coaches and everything. It just, seemed like the perfect fit. And, always wanted to go down to Louisiana and see what it's about. So,
Dallin, how would you kind of best describe your play style and just kind of point out some of your strengths?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like, I'm a versatile tight end, can line up, on the line, detached, in the backfield, out of receiver, in the slot. I feel like that's, that plays to my strength is there's a lot of different things that I'm able to do on the field, and it makes it hard on the defense to, to know and game plan in on that.
I don't know if you've noticed or if you've seen it, but you're already drawing a lot of comparisons to another former BYU guy here in Taysom Hill. And how do you like those comparisons outside of the quarterback part, of course, but, in terms of how you can move around on the offense?
Yeah, no, super grateful, growing up here in Utah and playing at BYU for a little bit. Everyone down here knows who Taysom Hill is, so, that's a big deal. Taysom's a great player, and, I'm excited to learn from him and, pick his brain a little bit.
Your production obviously was a lot better in your final season. What? Just about opportunity, or was there anything about your own growth and your own game that led to you kind of having that much more productivity your final year?
Yeah, no, for sure. Every year I'm trying to grow and become a better player, but definitely, at Colorado State, they saw the ability that I had and they trusted in me and let me go out there and, they had some great game plans and just let me do my thing. So definitely opportunity, that was, a big part of it for sure.
Yeah, and so like Dallin was talking about there, he started his career at BYU. He actually did a Mormon mission in Chile. He speaks fluent Spanish. He's a really interesting guy. Again, he spent 1 year at Colorado State, and he was voted team captain by his teammates. I think that tells you a little bit about his influence in the locker room and kind of the immediate impact he was able to have. One other thing I'll mention before we go on a little bit, Trey McBride. If you remember Trey McBride, he's a guy out of Colorado State. I think he had 84 catches, like 800 yards last year on it. What was otherwise a pretty anemic Cardinals offense. So I don't think that it's a coincidence when you see certain programs put out NFL caliber tight ends. It's like literally what Iowa has made a living doing for the last 6-7 years. And I think maybe Colorado State's one of those programs. Maybe they just develop tight ends, and you'll see. I mean, he didn't get drafted, probably should have gotten drafted. I think it's a surprise that he didn't get drafted. And, he's taking it in stride. And I think, and this is kind of what he said, and this is what makes sense, in my opinion. When you're in the 7th round, it's exciting. You want to hear your name called. You want to see your highlights flash up on the screen and to get the guy's analysis because, great pick, whatever. At the end of the day, you're probably better off going undrafted rather than going in the 7th round. Because if you know that you have teams interested in you, how much better off are you as a 7th round pick and going somewhere that you can't control versus, hey, I want to play for the Saints, so I'm going to go sign with them. And being able to kind of choose your path, I think, is helpful for some guys. And I think it's probably helpful for Dallin here because he doesn't have to worry about the situation he's walking into. He got to choose the situation he's walking into. So, let's kind of go from there. 767 yards, 6 touchdowns on 64 catches last year for the Rams. 64 of those catches. Those 64 catches ranked 3rd all time for the Rams at any position. He had back-to-back 100-yard games early in the year. It started with that crazy Colorado game that kind of caught the nation's attention. I think that's why a lot of folks will remember Dallin because everyone was watching those games. I watched that game, early in the year before Colorado fell off a cliff. They were the most interesting thing going. And that game against Colorado State was fascinating. Dallin went nuts. And then he went nuts the week later. And I bring that up because, back-to-back 100-yard games. You know how long it's been since the Saints had a 100-yard game from a tight end? I'll give you like 8 seconds to kind of ponder that on your own before I tell you. Okay, I'm not going to do the whole song. 2015. 2015. Ben Watson. The Saints had 2 100-yard games from Ben Watson in the span of like 4 weeks in 2015. They haven't had one in almost 9 years since then. That's crazy. Now, there is a caveat because Jared Cook had a 99-yard game. So in the spirit of what a 100-yard game represents, fine. They did get some impressive performances out of Jared Cook. But when you think about where this Saints offense was in like 2011, 2012, 2013, the amazing contributions they got from Jimmy Graham and those incredible offenses that he was kind of the tip of the spear of, along with Drew Brees, obviously. Man, wouldn't it be nice to have even a smidgen of that again? And I don't know. I think Juwan is close. Juwan had a 90-yard game last year. So again, and I think that kind of showed you, like, the Saints dominated that game against the Bucs, and in no small part because Juwan Johnson dominated that game against the Bucs. They took control of that game because of what he was able to do in the first half, and that just hasn't been the case enough of the time. And so one of the things that's bugged me is the Saints have not invested enough of the tight end position. I still don't think they have, because they didn't spend the draft pick on it this year, and they're kind of just letting whatever comes to them come to them. They didn't, they signed Jared Cook. That was kind of a big splash signing, and he did have an impact. I think when the Saints are playing their best over those few seasons, it was when Jared Cook was playing well, and you just haven't really had that impact. And when the Saints are playing well last year, Juwan Johnson was making an impact. So one way or another, I think you need to see an impact from the tight end position, and it'll be interesting to see if it's Dallin. Now, the struggle I have is how many kind of blocking deficient tight ends can you have on a roster at the same time? And that's probably not a fair way to describe it, but I also wouldn't describe blocking as the strength of Juwan, of Dallin. Foster's really not a great blocking tight end. Foster Morrow, he's a good blocking tight end, but you really don't have you don't even have a blocker that is the Josh Hill caliber, right? He was on this team for a reason, and it was to block. Troutman was actually a solid blocker for what he was, although he made mistakes constantly. So it's like, how many tight ends, for a team that doesn't really trust his offensive line to begin with, you're also kind of loading up on tight ends that are not top end blockers. And so that'll be something that is probably difficult to work around. And that said, I don't think that Dallin's a shoe-in to make this roster either. Again, because you only have so many spots, and is he going to see the field? The question for Dallin, and this is what I talked about with the wide receivers, can he go make a tackle on special teams? Can he do that? If he can, then he can make this roster. If he struggles, if that is not something he can do at a high enough level, then he's not making the roster, because you're not keeping a third or fourth tight end that does not impact special teams. All that said, you can go watch his highlights, you can go watch his tape, and there's a lot of it. The guy's got hands. It's not a coincidence that he's making Hail Mary grabs that just kind of are on his shoe tops, or one-handed catches in the end zone. His tape is littered with these kind of high ball catches, these hands catches. And it's impressive. It really is. You don't see wide receivers with those hands. Now, he's not an incredible athlete, but he is kind of rangy. He does have those long strides. He can get out in the open field and make guys miss. He's tough to tackle. And when he gets into the second level, he is 6'4". The defensive backs are going to have a hard time with him. He credits basketball. He was a big basketball player coming up, and he credits that for kind of his footwork and his hands and his ability to go up and get a ball. And that's all impressive. And I think that even if he doesn't make the roster, he's a surefire practice squad guy, assuming you cut him and he clears waivers. But again, I think it's going to be a question of what he can do on special teams. And we're going to talk a lot more about special teams in the next episode when we go through the defensive side of the ball. But, Dallin, I'm excited for him. I am. Don't take this as me not being excited for him. I'm just frustrated that this team continues to not invest to the tight end position, because they just don't. They absolutely do not. And then you watch all of these teams that have success. The final four teams in the last year's playoffs. You're talking about teams with Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Sam Laporta. And it's made even more frustrating by the idea. It's like, you don't even have to invest top end capital. Spend a third round pick every couple of years. No, the Saints don't do that. They do it once every 10 years. And it's frustrating. And so hopefully Dallin can make an impact. But the fact of the matter is the Saints are continuing to throw UDFAs at the wall, just like they did with Juwan, and say this is enough. and it's not enough. We'll see, but hopefully Dallin proves me wrong and becomes that next great tight end out of Colorado State. And again, he can maybe match Trey McBride in a couple of years, and we'll see. But either way, I think he's going to be a fun guy to watch at camp. And I'm being a negative Nancy about a guy who you should be excited about, and we'll find out. Because again, those hands, man, there's some of the catches he makes. You're just like, oh yeah, I see it, I see it. But that's it. That's going to wrap up this episode of Meet the UDFAs. We're going to come back later in the week with the defensive side of the equation, plus a punter, because there are only 7 defensive UDFAs and a punter. And it just made sense to lump him in. I wanted to put him with the offense because a punter kind of feels like an offensive thing, special teams. But hey, we'll start with the punter and go from there. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. Who dat? Go Saints. Subscribe. Be easy, y'all. Peace.